Okay. Good morning, everybody, and a good Yom Tov, good Yor. Trust everyone had a pleasant Yom Kippur in shul or at home. They should give us all a good year, a healthy year, prosperous year, a freiliche year, simcha year. Okay. We are holding the middle of Perek Daled of Iggeres Hateshuva. Oh, somebody just fell off. Okay. We are holding actually on page Tzadik Hey, but I'm going to give you a brief review of what we've done until now. In Perek Aleph, Beis, and Gimel, the Alter Rebbe is discussing the logistics, if you want to call it that, of practical tshuva, times of the Beis Hamikdash, and fasting and not fasting, and karbones, and what we do in place of fasting, and when we're supposed to fast. If it's part of tshuva, no, it's not. It's separate from tshuva. It's in place of the korban, and we can't fast in place of the korban. Then we give tzedakah in place of the fasting. So he told us the logistics of the practicalities of how tshuva is done and the different time stages in tshuva and kapara, as well as, like we said, when fasting is relevant and important, and when tzedakah is important, and so on. Then in Perek Daled, he starts a new subject in tshuva, and that is that as far as tshuva is concerned, the person has fulfilled the mitzvah of tshuva by doing all of the above. However, what about the damage that was done spiritually as a result of the tshuva? What damage was done, and how is that damage repaired? And he tells us that this is something that the Zohar tells us, a very cryptic statement, that the word tshuva is a composition of two words, toshuv, hey, to return the hay, to give back the hay. What does that mean? So the Alter Rebbe started explaining to us that the idea of the Yud Kei Vav Kei and there's two hays, he didn't explain it, that we're going to go through later. What he's doing now here is explaining to us, to understand all of this. He says at the bottom of page 186, in the beginning of the Perek Daled, he says, to understand all of the above, we begin, and here he begins a lengthy journey, explaining to us in this perek and in the next perek where the neshama comes from and what the neshama is. In other words, before we can understand what harm and damage was done to Yud Kei Vav Kei when we committed a sin, we need to first understand who we are and what our neshama is. So we know from Perek Beis in the Kutei Amorim in the beginning of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe mentioned in short, or relatively short compared to here, he mentioned and explained the idea that the neshama is a part of the Eibishter. Nefesh Hashenis b'Yisrael, he says, the second nefesh is chelek elokah mimal, mamash is an actual portion of God. That he taught us in the beginning of chapter Beis. And he explained over there that it comes from Hashem's blowing. The pasuk says, Vayipach ba'apav nishmas chaim. Here he goes through that again, but in much more elaboration. So he says at the end, on the bottom, I'm just going to go through this quickly. He says over here, where in the 4 lines from the bottom of page 186, he says, we'll understand all of this regarding tshuva based on the pasuk, Kichele Kavaya Amri. That a portion of Hashem is Amri, is his nation. And Am Yisrael is an actual chunk, a portion of Hashem, a Chelek Mishem Avaya Baruch Hu. It's an actual piece of God. And then he goes on throughout the next page of Tzadik Daled, explaining to us the difference between all of creation, even the Malachim, and the neshamas. That all of creation are created by the word of Hashem, or he says, all of creation is created by the word of Hashem, while neshama comes from the breath, the blowing, which comes from the very depth and deepness of Hashem. And therefore he says that one is a level of superficial level of Eibishter, and one is a more internal level of Eibishter. Elikim is superficial, Yud Kei Vav Kei is internal, and everything else, even the Malachim, come from the Eibishter's name of Elikim, while the Neshamas come from the Eibishter's name of Yud Kei Vav Kei. What's the difference between Elikim and Yud Kei Vav Kei? So we mentioned last time, that would be the difference between, for example, the sun and its shield. Right? You have the sun, which gives off light, and you have the shield of the sun, which we call the ozone, which conceals the light. Now, the purpose of the shield is, of course, that we should be able to receive the light of the sun. Without the shield, we wouldn't be very wouldn't be able to survive with the sun shining. So that David HaMelech says in Tilim is the example of Havaya and Elikim. Pasuk in Tilim it says Kishemesh Umogen Hashem Havaya Elikim, like the sun and its shield. That's the relationship between Havaya and Elikim. So the creation of the world is from Elikim, as we say in Pasuk, Bereishis bara Elikim, right? Hashem created the world with Elikim. While Yud-Kei Vav-Kei is reserved, that's the Eibishter revealing himself, like in the beginning of Aseres HaDibros, it says, Vayidaber Hashem Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. The Ten Commandments, Aseres HaDibros, came from the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. Let's let everybody in. Okay. So therefore, the point what he's proving, and that goes to the whole page of Tzadik Daled, good morning, that goes to the whole page of Tzadik Daled, explaining to us this idea that the neshama comes from the pnimius, the internal part of Hashem, or as we know as Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. Then he goes on to explain to us in the bottom of page Tzadik Daled, he starts to explain to us from the Tikkun Isaiah about Eliyahu, Pasuk Eliyahu, that the Eibishter, the way he functions within the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. What is Yud-Kei Vav-Kei? Yud-Kei Vav-Kei is actually a map of how the Eibishter is functioning, how the Eibishter relates with our world. And that is the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. And that's what we learned throughout the page of 188, that Yud-Kei Vav-Kei is the process, Yud is the dot, that would be like the level of Chochmah, and then there's the Spashtus of the Hey, the expansion, which is the Bina compared to Chochmah, the idea, which we have a flash of wisdom, and then Bina is when we elaborate and understand it in its length and in its breadth and in its width. And then there's the Vav, which brings it down, and that's the 6 midas through which Hashem expresses itself, and then the Hey, which is again the expansion here in this world. Why is he telling us all of that? And he spent the whole page of 188 telling us that. So he says, because that's necessary for us to be able to understand who or how our neshama works. Because we are created in the image of God, and therefore, the same way the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, good morning, the same way the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei works, that's how our neshamas work. And that's why he spends this whole page of 188 telling us this whole map of Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. Also, we should be able to eventually get to the original point of returning the Hey to Shem Havaya. Okay? So, it's not going to get much heavier than that as such. Right? He just is showing us how the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei works in the Eibishter. And now we're holding the top of page Tzadik Hey. That's in short what we learned until now in Perek Daled, which started this new subject. So in the second line of page Tzadik Hey, right after the parentheses. Okay. Yeah, you see it? V'kocha mamash. So exactly like this, kocha like this, mamash, he says quite literally. By way of example, by way of analogy, hamavdal havdolis lane kates, with many havdolis, infinite amount of havdolis, but it's exactly the same thing. But with infinite amount of havdolis, the same thing is benishmas adam. It applies in the neshama of a person. Shehi Pchinas Nefesh Elikis, the neshama, which we keep repeating and saying, is a level of Nefesh Elikis, which the Miteichi Nofach, which is blown from Teiche, from the inner part of the Eibishter. In other words, from the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei as opposed to Elikim. That's the Pnimius, that's the inner part. So therefore, just as the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei from where the neshama comes from, consists of 10 levels, alluded to in the imagery of Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, the same thing will be with the neshama. The neshama has it as well. And here he's coming full circle, and this will understand why he went through this whole long page of 188 explaining to us how it works in Havaya, because that's how it works in the neshama. If we understand the way it works in Havaya, then we can understand the way it works in the neshama. That's what he's going to tell us now. Yes, B'Bchina Seichel HaNelam. The Nefesh Elikis also has the level of Seichel HaNelam, the concealed Chachma, the concealed wisdom. And that's Hanamuru Mezes Beis Yud, which is hinted in the letter Yud. Right? Just as Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, the Yud is the beginning. The Yud is that flash of wisdom, that Chachma. So too does the Nefesh Elikis have that. Right? The Nefesh Elikis has all the 10 spheres. Well, the 10 meters, serious, yeah. So the nefesh also has nefesh elokis, the seichel anelim. Shebekechi lotus elagilui. What does this part of our neshama do for us? It allows it to become revealed, lahavin, in order that we should be able to understand, ulahaskil, to conceive, be'amitosi yizbarach b'gdulose, to be able to understand, that we should be able to have a comprehension and an understanding of the truth and greatness of the Eibishter's existence. That, where do we get that ability to be able to have a true understanding and a conception of Hashem's amitoso yizbarach, of his true existence? That comes from the neshama. We're specifically in the neshama. Which part of the neshama? That's the yud. Every one of us, kol chad lefum shiur delay. Obviously, every person according to their shir, according to their measure. Lefi reichav sichlei benasei. It depends according to the reichav, the breadth of a person's seichel and one's bina. So it's a relationship here between our yud of our neshama and our seichel. So the yud of the neshama is giving us the ability to be able to comprehend the elikus. The truth is, we shouldn't be able to comprehend the elikus. How can we comprehend something which is totally spiritual and have some even minimal understanding of something spiritual? That comes from the neshama. Then it depends on how much I use my seichel. It depends on my intellect and my understanding. And if I put my head to it, then I'll be able to understand more or less, all depending lefi kol chad lefum shiur delay. Every person according to his measure of intellectual capacity, so to speak. But the premise that I should be able to even have an understanding of elikus, that comes because we have a neshama. And specifically, where in the neshama? It comes from the yud of the neshama. And relative to how much a person will delve with one's seichel, will deepen with one's seichel, and broaden one's mind, and one's understanding, one's comprehension, to contemplate, to be mizbeinen in the greatness of Hashem. So as a person will develop and deepen one's intelligence, one's understanding, one's awareness, etc., of the greatness of Hashem, then ozai merumezes binasei ba'is hey. That's the bina already, and that's alluded to. That's hinted in the letter hey of the name of Yud Kei Vav Kei in the neshama. Because over there, sheyesh la reichav. Over there, it already has reichav, means a breadth. In other words, chachma is the idea. Bina is the development of that idea. So it already starts to expand. So it has already reichav, expansion. What we call the breadth of understanding. Okay. So it starts off in the neshama, and then it goes into our seichel to be able to develop the idea that our neshama gave us the ability to be able to understand. That's in the expansion in the way of reichav, of breadth. Then also v'gam ba'erech. The hay also has length. That already indicates downward, to extend and to bring it downwards. In other words, for example, to understand, I give you an idea. Take an example from today's Sefer HaMitzvahs. Okay, so today we're learning the dinim of Yibum and Chalitza. This week, yesterday, today, the day before, we're learning the laws of Yibum and Chalitza. Levirate marriage, as it's called in English, right? So there's the idea of levirate marriage. It's a concept. That's Chochmah. Now, in the Bina, you learn, if you go into it won't be in the Sefer HaMitzvahs. The Sefer HaMitzvahs would be like the Chochmah. That gives us just the general idea of what the mitzvah is. If you want to go into the details of what the mitzvah is, to be able to expand your understanding of the laws of Yibum and Chalitza, so you'll open up the Rambam and he'll give us an expansion of all the laws. That's Rechav. Then, today, in the second chapter of today's Rambam, he goes and explains to us the practicalities. Now, let's take all of this information that we have in the first, however many chapters it was. Now, let's practicalize them. Let's see how we can bring them down and how they're actually administered, how the actual Yibum and Chalitza ceremony takes place. So that would be an example of what he refers to over here, the Hamshocha Milamayda Lamata. That's you have the width of the hay, and you have the length of the hay, and that is drawing down the downward extension. Hamshacha milamayla lamata. So that's eirech, rechav, and eirech. So when you learn something, you can learn, and you're learning it. That's the rechav. You expand your understanding of this idea, and then you also need to be able to know how to actually bring it down into milamayla lamata, from your mind, and to actually bring it down into practical. Same thing applies with learning how to drive a car, and the same thing applies with practically everything else that we do. We learn the rules, and then when it comes to actually doing it, that's really a whole different. Many people fail driving tests. They pass the written test, and they've been watching driving since they were kids. They see their parents driving. But when it comes to actual driving, they have a problem. What went wrong? They understand it, but they understand it in Rechav, but it's not able to come down in Eirech. For whatever reason it is. It's not a problem. It's not a problem with them. It's just some people in that particular area of driving, they're not able to bring it down into the practical. But that's an example of Rechav and Eimek. Of Rechav and Eirech. Rechav is width in Hebrew. Eirech is, literally, Eirech means the length. Here we're talking about, as he says, Hamshacha milamayla lamata. As he explains, what would be the example of an Eirech, of bringing down the knowledge that you established in Rechav, in width, in breadth, that you've developed in your mind in breadth? Where would it be an example of bringing that down into practical? He says that's what we know as Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. That to give birth from his Bina and his Beinanus, from his Bina, the comprehension and the elaboration, the understanding of it, in the Gdula of Hashem, the greatness of Hashem, to bring down what? Ava v'yira, love and fear. V'tel desein, and all of their offspring, meaning the other emotional attributes that all stem from Ava and Yira. Everything else comes from Ava and Yira. Those are the two basic emotional levels regarding our relationship with the Eibishter. Everything else are an offshoot of that. So you have here, we see already how it's working in the neshama. You have the yud of the neshama, is the ability for us to be able to even relate with the lakus. The hay of the neshama is two parts. There's the width or the breadth of it, which is the rechav, is to be able to start understanding, not just to relate that there's an Eibishter, but to be able to start learning and understanding it, as we do when we learn Chassidus, and to build our vocabulary, to build our understanding, to build our appreciation. That's all the rechav, the breadth. But then there's also the eirech, which is bringing it down. And bringing it down means when all of our knowledge starts to trickle down and have an effect on us. And that effect would be in our avo and yira, in our love and awe of Hashem. Where? In one's mind and in the hidden parts of the heart. In other words, it will affect the person. Ava and Yira will affect the person in the head and in the heart. And when he says talumas libi, the hidden parts of the heart, means the deepest parts of a person. The more we know, the more we understand. The more we understand, the more we'll be able to have an Ava and Yira. The more we have an Ava and Yira, it'll go deeper and deeper within us. But this is all still early stages, okay? Because it's still only the Yud and the Hey. But then afterwards, it's going to come down even further, and that is going to be his galos. B'chinas his galos. That's going to come already revealed in libo, in the heart. So in other words, even in love and awe and av and yira, there's also the concealed one, and then it becomes revealed. So you're following the map over here. We have a whole map going on over here of how it comes down. It starts with the yud, that's the awareness that there's an Eibishter. Then it goes into the hay. The hay is already expansion, where we're expanding our knowledge. And that's simply by understanding and learning, and then learning a lakus, learning about godliness, and you expand your knowledge more and more and more. That's expanding it in the width. And then it comes and expands even downwards in the eirech, in the length, or in the downward extension. And that is to give birth through one's bina and one's isbeininus to give birth to ava and yira, to the potential of ava and yira. Then it comes down to the next level, his galus liboy, into the revealed parts of the heart. Okay. So this downward progression from the seichel, from the intellect, into the midas, into the emotion, that is, if we look at the imagery again of Yud Kei Vav Kei, that is indicated by not the width of the hay, but by the length of the hay. Okay? Compared to the Yud is an akuda, the Yud is only one dot. It doesn't take up any space. The Yud itself, we know, also there's the Keitzeh Shel Yud, there's the point of the Yud, and then there's the Yud itself. But in general, the Yud is a dot. So then he says, so these emotions that we've just, the evolution of these emotions from the Yud into the Hey and down, even down into the revealed parts of the heart. So from them is Nimshach Aveda Amitis, from them comes the true Aveda Be'esek HaTerev HaMitzvahs, in one's Esek, in one's involvement or observance of Terev Mitzvahs, Bekel, V'dibur, or Maisa, whether it be in voice or speech or in actual action. And so he's referring to over here when he says by Aveda Amitis, is Perek Dalet of in Tanya. He spoke about what's Aveda Amitis. I'm not going to go into that now. So he's saying that when you have this process from the Yud all the way down until it becomes B'chinas his Galus Liboy, that is where you're going to have Aveda Amitis. Then you'll be able to have a genuine and real Aveda in Torah and Mitzvahs. Hein Oisiz, that already is the Vav and the Hey. This is already the next level, which is the letters of Vav and Hey, the end of the Yud Kei Vav Kei. Vav is the voice and the speech, while Hey is action. He doesn't elaborate it on over here. The Yud and the Hey are the most important parts. The Vav is already the Hamshacha downwards. You have the love in your heart already. That's still in the Hey. The love and the Av of the Yira. Then comes the Vav, which is actually going to bring it down into Aveda Amitis, which is in Torah Mitzvahs. V'gama his beinunus, and also the contemplation, lahovin or lahaskel b'mitosig delosu yizbarech, to understand and to conceive b'mitosig in the truth of Hashem's being, also nimshach gamkin min haTorah, also comes from the Torah. So there has to be the Torah before, in order to give us the Yud, right? The Yud is just the idea that there's an awareness of the Eibishter. Then there has to be learning Torah in order to be able to have that appreciation. And the more you learn, then it works downwards into the Hey, and then it works into the Midos, into Ava Yira, so that now you should be able to learn Torah with Ava and Yira. But it started with Torah and it ends with Torah. The whole thing evolves and is with Torah completely, from beginning to end. Because Torah comes, as the Zohar says, from the Eibishter's Chachma. And what's that? Yud Shel Shem Havaya, which is the Yud of the Eibishter. So it starts off with the Yud, that starts off with the Torah, and the end result will be an enhanced learning of Torah, Aveda Amitis, in Esek Torah Mitzvahs, as he just said. Okay. Now, so we have here, I hope you have here, we have the image of Yud Kei Vav Kei, and we have the Alter gave us a very vivid description of how Yud Kei Vav Kei works in the Eibishter, so that we should then be able to understand how our neshama works, so that when the pasuk, which we said at the beginning of the chapter, at the bottom of the first page of the bottom of 186, where he says, let's start our whole discussion based on the pasuk of last week's Parsha Hazinu, Ki Chelek Havaya Amoy, that Amoy, his nation, is a chelek, is a chunk, a portion of the Eibishter. So it's not just as we say, from when we ended up from what you know previously in Tanya, that a neshama is a piece of Hashem, which of course is true. Now you have much. You have much more information. What that means, a piece of Hashem. You have more details now. Just as Yud Kei Vav Kei works in such a way, so too does our neshama also have the same Yud Kei Vav Kei features, like in a DNA. The DNA has the exact DNA as the parent. It's not just that David blew a piece of himself in us. That we have already from Perek Beis and Tanya. Here, he's already teaching us the very specifics that the DNA of a neshama is actually the same DNA of the Eibishter. The DNA is Yud Kei Vav Kei. Now, just for an aside, for a few minutes, we're told, it says, I think it's from the Arizal, that the 4 days between Yom Kippur and Sukkot correspond to Yud Kei Vav Kei. So Hashgacha Pratis, that we're learning this now in these 4 days. That's why the day after Yom Kippur is called Gotz Nomen. Yesterday morning was called B'Shem Hashem, because it's the beginning of Yud Kei Vav Kei. It's the Yud. Yesterday was the Yud, and the morning was known as the Keitzer Shel Yud, the point, the top of the Yud. That's why it's a minig to get up earlier and to daven earlier and so on. Not just to show that we meant that we were real on Yom Kippur. Of course, we were real on Yom Kippur. The point that we get up earlier is because that is it's the beginning of Yud Kei Vav Kei. What does that mean? These 4 days are Yud Kei Vav Kei. So Chassidus is explained that the Alter Rebbe says in Iggeres Yud Daled, that every year on Rosh Hashanah there's a new Gilu a new revelation of godliness revealed into the world, which there never was before since the time of creation. So that on Rosh Hashanah, we, through blowing shofar, we bring down a new level of Gilu a new level of Elikus. And that's done on Rosh Hashanah with the tkiyas that we blow. But it's a gili of Elikus down into this world. It takes time for this gili to come all the way from up there, and there's a process of how it's able to come down. So on Rosh Hashanah, it's with the tkiyas shofar. And on Yom Kippur, it's done with the ketores. And on Sukkot, it's done with the sukkah and the schach. Now, you see all of these three things. You see there's a process here. On Rosh Hashanah, we blow shofar. That's sound. Sound doesn't have any tangibility. It's a sound. You can't feel it or see it or smell it. It's a sound. Yom Kippur is already the ketores, which is brought in the Beis Hamikdash. You can already see it and you can smell it. You can't feel it yet. It's not yet tangible, but it's becoming more megushim. It's already becoming more material. Sukkos, we already have a physical sukkah, schach. The schach is meant to be the equivalent of the ketores in the Beis Hamikdash on Yom Kippur. The Kohen Gadol would go into the Beis Hamikdash, into the Kodesh HaKadoshim on Yom Kippur, and he would burn the ketores. He had to wait in there until the plume of smoke covered the entire top of the room of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Then he was allowed to leave. The equivalent of that, it says, is the schach of the sukkah. So we have here sound coming down into smoke, coming down into a tangible sukkah with tangible schach. But it's still, the sukkah is still chitzeni, it's still external. It hasn't yet become into a pnimius. This is all symbolizing the new Gilu that came down on Rosh Hashanah. When does it come into a pnimius? Comes to a pnimius, that's already Shmini Atzeres. Shmini Atzeres is, as it says, Shmini Atzeres Tiyeh Lachem. What does Atzeres mean? Atzeres means klita, which means to absorb. Right? Modern Hebrew. Anyone doing Aliyah, you can have a Merkaz Klita, an absorption center. And they're going to teach you Ivrit, and they're going to teach you all the tricks of how to get around Israel, with all, how to deal with taxi drivers, and et cetera, et cetera. So it all comes from the word klita. Atzeres means klita. On Shmini Atzeres is when we absorb, we internalize all. So on the literal level, that's the end of Yom Tov, right? It's the end of everything. But on the spiritual level, we're saying that's when we now absorb and internalize, and we bring down this new Gilead that started on Rosh Hashanah. And that's why, according to the din, we don't have to sit in the sukkah anymore. There's no need anymore for the superficial, external trappings. Now it's already becoming internal. So we don't have to have a sound. We don't have to have a smoke. We don't have to have a sukkah. We have sukkah because of his 2 days Yom Tov, but as far as the din is concerned, the Shmini Atzeres, it's not necessary anymore. So Shmini Atzeres is the day when everything becomes incorporated and absorbed. And what we're talking about specifically, this new Gili of Elikus. So now we have the 4 days between Yom Kippur and Sukkot. So now we're making another major transition. The transition from the smoke of Yom Kippur to the walls of the Sukkah. So here we see this in the Yud Kei Vav Kei. We can understand a bit better how this process is working. So yesterday was the Yud, today is the Hey, tomorrow is the Vav, and then Friday is the Hey again. So we have a much better understanding of what that means. Yesterday would have been that flash of the idea, the Chochmah of the Eibishter was revealed. Today is already the Hey. Today we can already start taking this and expanding it and elaborating on it and understanding it. Vav is already tomorrow. This is all levels of bringing down the Likus more and more until Hey, where it actually comes into most practical and so on. Hence we have Zman Simchosenu, taking all the ideas that you may have learned about Rosh Hashanah and about Hateshuva and about Elul, about Yom Kippur. Zman Simchosenu is an expression of joy for all of that which we have experienced until now.
Can I just ask you, what's this? You said that every year on Rosh Hashanah there's a new revelation that's brought down in these different ways between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. I don't understand what the new revelation, what that means, a new revelation.
Good question. All of existence exists by virtue of the Eibishter making it exist.
Yeah.
Right? So we say in davening every day, in the bracha before Shema, 2 brachas before Shema, Machadesh, Betuva, B'chol Yom Tamid. Right? So really, Bereshis is happening every day. Every moment. The Eibishter is constantly recreating the world. So he's recreating the world with energy. Okay? Once a year, we know that once a year Hashem needs to, he designed it that we need to renew the contract. So that when the evening of Rosh Hashanah comes in, the world goes into what you would call on a computer, would call into a standby mode, and the world is on low flame. Okay? And then it's up to us, we blow shofar, etc. That's going to reinstate and give a new desire for the Eibusha to have Malchus. So the Alter Rebbe explains that it's even more than that. That when he plugs the world back in with renewed energy, it's not renewed energy, it's new energy. It's a higher level of energy. Okay? I don't have an example of that, with electricity, you plug something out, you plug something back in, the electricity is still the same electricity. So that's not a good example. But we're talking about the energy with which the Eibusha creates the world. On Rosh Hashanah, there's a higher level. And every year it's higher and higher and higher.
Is that because we're coming to the Mashiach coming? Is that why? Because I thought generations were going down, but we're sort of like going.
Generations are going down and Lakus is going up.
Right.
That's why we got to catch up. We can't be going the other way while he's going that way. As you advance a business, for example, you put in more, you develop it, and you're doing more and more, and it's growing. That's a sign of growth. So the amount of energy, care, effort that you put in at the beginning may be different than much later on. Later on, it may be already running the business. So you can, in the physical world, you can relax, you can retire, you can watch some of your son take over the business, etc. Right? But the business needs to grow. In order for the business needs to grow, it needs to have fresh energy, fresh people, for whatever it is, fresh customers. You need to expand. Even Coca-Cola needs to expand. They never, right? They need to keep expand. So too it is with the Likus and the Eibishter's project. So every year there's a new level of a Likus, and we are the ones that bring it down. That's what it means by the new levels of a Likus. Okay.
Yeah.
So this process of bringing down the new level of this radiation, of this energy, of this Likus, doesn't just happen. Because you're talking about a higher level of a Likus and a world which is a very mundane and physical world. So that's a process, and that's what we have throughout the month of Tishrei. We're slowly bringing it down. I can't remember. I keep forgetting this one. The Rebbe once explained that we have Tkiyas on Rosh Hashanah, which is 100. There's another thing in the Ketores of Yom Kippur, which I can't remember, which also works out to 100. I can't remember what it is. I always forget. I have it written down somewhere, and I forgot where. And then there's the Schach of Sukkah, which Schach also is 100. Samach, Chof. Samach is 60. Chof and Chof is 20 and 20, which is also 100. And then there's the 100 in Yom Kippur as well. So we see that the 100 symbolizes the 10 midas as they are 10 within 10. the 10 spheres, not the 10 midas, the 10 spheres. And this is all part of the process of bringing down the Likus. And then on Shmini Atzeres is one. Eibishter and us. Shmini Atzeres is when we are as one. Famous Rashi in Rashi says over there in Pashas Pinchas that throughout the days of Sukkot, there are the Pasuk says, throughout the days of Sukkot, 70 bulls were brought for Karbanis. And that corresponds to the 70 nations of the world. 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, and 7. But then, for 7 days. But then, by Yom HaShmini, on the 8th day, Par Echad, Ayel Echad, 1. It goes from 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7. That's for 7 days. And then it goes to 1. What's 1? So the Rashi says, because 1 is Yidden and the Eibishter alone. Yisrael or Malka B'Lechadai. This is Yidden and the Eibishter alone. While on Sukkot we daven for the nations of the world, if they would only know what we do for them, as the Gemara says, if the nations would know what we're doing for them throughout the 7 days of Sukkot, we're davening for them. But on Shmini Atzeres, it's us and the Eibishter alone. That's the tremendous celebration of Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah, the tremendous celebration of Yisrael U'Malka, Yisrael and the King, Bilu Chadai, alone. It's just us. And Rashi even uses the words, he brings the Medrash, it says, the example, he gives a parable of the king who wanted to celebrate one more day with his very close ones, and he said, "Boy, ani va'atu nagalgel yachad." A very interesting expression. Let you and me come, let's celebrate and roll together. Not just a party, to roll together. You know, it's a really heavy party where they start rolling, somersaulting. Hence the Hasidic custom of doing a kula on Simchas Torah. It comes from there. In other words, it's an expression of such closeness and love and oneness with the Eibishter that we're actually rolling together with joy. That's why Simchas Torah is really the most holiest and most special day of the whole month of Tishrei. It's the climax of the whole month. Of course, Yom Kippur is important, but Simchas Torah, that's the greatest expression of the unity and oneness of Yidden with the Eibishter. That's why it's such an important day. But you need to learn Chassidus to be able to properly understand and appreciate that. Unfortunately, this year, for the British Jewish establishment, the days of Mashiach have arrived. They can cancel Simchas Torah. Okay, so that's just an example of what we're learning over here, this Yud Kei Vav Kei, and how it applies to actually the days that we're living in right now. We're in the middle of this Yud Kei Vav Kei in our relationship with Hashem. Okay, so let's move on now to Perek Hey. Chapter 5, bottom page. Yeah, go for it.
Where do the 10 spheres come in with all this?
So Yud is Chachma, Hey is Bina, Vav is 6, which is the next 6 spheres, and Hey is Malchus.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so we're in the bottom of, so Perek Hey, page Tzadik Hey in your Tanya. So now that we understand what the neshama is, and that was the theme of Daled, after he asked a few questions in the beginning. The theme of Perek Daled was to understand properly the DNA of the neshama, so to speak, over and above than what we already explained in Perek Beis and Likutei Amorim. Now, let's take this further, so we should be able to, and the direction we're going is to understand the idea of tshuva, of returning the hay. We still haven't got to there yet. So we understand now what the neshama is. Hine. Bringing down, hamshacha, drawing down, or bringing down the yirida and the descent of the nefesh elokis into this world. Lislabish beguf adam, to enclothe itself within the body of a person. Where does that hamshacha and that descent come from? Nimshacha mipchinas pnimius u'mokar hadibur. So this comes from the internal aspect of the dibur, of the speech. What does that mean? The neshama itself, we said, is the Eibish's breath. He blew, vayipach, ba'apov nishmas chaim. He blew into his nostrils a breath of life. So from that we learn that where does the neshama come from? The neshama is from the very deepest parts of the Eibishter, symbolized by blowing. Fine, that's the neshama. Now what about the neshama coming down? That already is the Eibishter instructs it to come down. That's already dibur. Dibur, we said, is chitzenius. Dibur is already more external than blowing, right? The breath that you have in dibur is a much shallower breathing than you have when blowing, right? We spoke the difference in talking and blowing balloons. You can talk, don't mean anybody in particular, but we can talk for hours and hours. But blowing a balloon, you get out of breath quite quickly because it's coming from deeper within. So the neshama itself comes from the Eibishter blowing. But the hamshacha and yirida of the nefesh elokis to be mislabish in the gufa adam, that already is nimshacha mibchinas pnimius u'mokar hadibur. That already comes from the Eibishter's dibur. But which part of his dibur? From the pnimius, the internal aspect, on the mokar, the source of dibur, which is what? Who hevel elyin? This is the hevel, the breath, the supernal breath, hamirumos, which is hinted or indicated in ois hey tato canal in the lower hey that we mentioned above. So Yud and Hey and Vav, this is all the neshama. Then the final Hey is when the Eibishter's this final Hey, which Hey is okay. I don't remember if we mentioned this last week. Yeah, we did somehow at some point. Was it with you? I can't remember. That Hey is the letter that you don't have to even pronounce it with a vowel. It's just breath itself. Was it here? Yeah. You can without even a vowel. It doesn't have to make any sound. So Hey is the basic of all the letters. Every letter that you're going to pronounce is going to have some form of hevel, right? Hevel means of breathing. So that is the Eibishter's, that's the pnimius of dibur, right? That's the internal aspect of dibur. So whatever you're saying, the words that are coming out of my mouth, I'm pronouncing them. Oh, that's right. We did it last week. We spoke about the 5 parts of the mouth, the different pronunciations of different letters. Some come from the guttural, some are from the lips, some are from the teeth, and some are from the palate, right? But they all come, they need to have the hevel in order to pronounce them. So this hevel is the pnimius of dibur, and then the speech that we speak would be called the chitzenius of dibur. There's the speech as we know it, and then there's the internal part of it, or internal doesn't do it. The pnimius, the pnimius of it is the very basic basis of it is not is already a chitzenius. It's already developed. There's already a sound. There's even something more basic than that, which is just the hevel, which is the breath itself. So the neshama comes from the deep blowing of the Eibishter. That's what the neshama is. It comes down into the body from the hey tato, which is the hevel ha'elyin. That's what he's saying. Hevel ha'elyin amenumas b'is hey tato kanal. And again, he repeats the pasuk again. As it's written, that he blew into his nostrils the breath of life. And that's when the man became a living creature. And as we know, he keeps repeating this because we got to keep remembering. We're using the imagery. He said it twice in the previous chapter that the Eibishter doesn't have a body. So how are we using it? So he says it's only so we should be able to understand and relate to it. So he keeps reminding us. What does it mean? The Eibishter's what does that mean? Because the Eibishter blew, and he blows, he who blows, he does so from within. So even the external aspect of the neshama that's in the body, which comes from the inner part of the Eibishter, is also coming from the inner part of the external part of the Eibishter. The neshama is the internal part of the Eibishter. The talking is the external part. The talking itself also has an internal and an external. So the talking or commanding the neshama to come into the guf is an instruction of the pnimius of Hashem to come into the guf, which comes from the pnimius of the dibur. You get that? Dibur is chitzenius compared to the pnimius of Hashem, but then dibur itself has pnimius and chitzenius too. In English, there's the internal, deeper part of Hashem. That's where the neshama comes from. Then there's the chitzenius of Hashem. The external part of Hashem is his expression. That's, for example, speech. Now, speech itself also has a pnimius and a chitzenius and deeper internal part and an external part. So we're saying that this neshama, which is from the internal part of Hashem, is spoken into the guf. So which part of speech? The pnimius of the chitzenius is from the pnimius of the speech. So It's the Pnimius of the Chitzenius, which is instructing the Pnimius of the Eibishter into the body. But don't get confused by the terminology. Pnimius of the Eibishter is the Neshama. Speech compared to the Eibishter is Chitzenius, but speech itself also has Pnimius and Chitzenius. Everything has a Pnimius and a Chitzenius. Everything has an internal, deeper part and an external part. So which part of the Eibishter is speech? That's the Hey, the Hevel Elyon. That's the last Hey of Yud Kei Vav Kei. You got that, everybody? Okay. And therefore, now come full circle to what we started off at the beginning of Perek Dalet. And this is the meaning of the pasuk Kichele Kavaya Amoy. Remember, that's how we started off this whole discussion. Now we understand this pasuk in a whole new light. That Kichele Kavaya, that a portion of the Eibishter, that is Amoy. Yidden are an actual part of the Eibishter. B'pnimius, b'chitzenius, on a deep level, on a speech level, on a Yud Kei Vav Kei level, we are a part of the Eibishter. And that's what the pasuk continues. Yaakov Chevel Nachalosa. He didn't quote this half of the pasuk in the previous parak. Here he quotes it because now we'll be able to understand it better. That Yaakov is the rope, so to speak, of Nachalosa, of the Eibishter's inheritance. What's the significance of the metaphor of a rope? The rope, the one end is always attached to the other end. So you can be standing on top even of a very tall building, but you're holding a rope and you shake the rope. Eventually, depending on how long or short the rope is, eventually the bottom will move. So too, we are connected to the Eibishter like a rope is connected to the top and the bottom. So we may be very distant. The Neshama descended down into this world all the way from the deepness of the Eibishter of Vayipach Ba'apav, and then it had to go through his speech and through the Hey, it had to go through the whole Yud Kei Vav Kei process. But it was still connected like a rope, like one end of the rope is always connected to the other end of the rope. Now that's very important because he's going to tell us now the significance of this metaphor of a rope. Because remember, we want to talk about the damage that's caused by sin. We spoke about kores, different punishments. So now that's what the significance now of this metaphor of the rope. Pirush, what does it mean? K'mei chevel, al derech moshel. Just like a rope, by way of analogy. That one end, or the upper end, the reish, the head, the upper end of it is bound above, and v'kotzeu, the other end, is lamata, is bound below. So too, the neshama. One end, the upper end of the neshama is bound above, and the lower end is in the body. Kihine pshat hakasuv mashenemar, because the simple meaning, the simple meaning of the pasuk vayipach is lahedis lanu, who is in order to instruct us, in order to teach us. Another insight into this pasuk of vayipach. Till now we spoke about vayipach, that it's a metaphor from where the neshama is coming from, that it's coming very deep. Now he's going to give us another insight into vayipach. What happens when you blow? Lahedis lanu, this comes to teach us something else. That like for example, when a person is blowing, when you blow something, you want to blow out a birthday cake or something like that. It will work, provided that what? That there's nothing getting in the way of you blowing. Right? If there's something in the way, your blowing it won't blow out the birthday candles. So, im yesh eze dover chaytzitz o mafsik b'ntayim, if there will be something which is a chaytzitz, like a chatzitza, a separation, or mafsik, an obstruction b'ntayim in between the blowing and the object at which you're blowing at, ein hevel hanefeach elu magia klal leisimokim. So the hevel, the breath of the blower, will not be able to arrive there. Top of the page. Because it's an obstruction. And that, he says, is also the significance of Vayipach, when the Eibishter blew the neshama into us. What does that mean? Does that mean that there's a time when the neshama can't come into us, or that there are obstructions? He says, Kocha Mamosh, precisely like this, Im yesh davar chaytzis umafsik, if there will be something which separates, obstructs, Ben guf adam lebchinas hevel elyon, between a person's body from the hevel elyon, from the supernal breath, the Eibishter's breath. If something gets in the way between my guf and the Eibishter's breath, i.e., my guf and the neshama that he's blowing into me, right? He's blowing it into me every day. We say Elakai neshama every morning. We say it. We say Medani, and then after we wash and we say brachas Elakai neshama shenasata bi, tanafachta bi. Right? We mention it every day that he blew it into us. But what happens if something obstructs? Something gets in the way. The same thing happens. It doesn't allow for the neshama to be able to impact the body. How could that be? What does it mean? What can get in the way of the neshama? The neshama is a likus. How can there be something in the way of a likus? So he says the truth of the matter is, the truth of the matter is there can't be. There is no davar gashmi, physical thing, or even davar ruchni, which can be a chatzitza, a barrier, a partition, a separation before the Eibishter. Nothing can get in the way of God. Because we know the pasuk says the Eibishter fills the heavens and the earth, and it says in another pasuk, all the worlds are full of His glory. And it says in the Zohar, there is no asad, there is no place that's devoid of Him. And as it says in pasuk, Bashamai Mimal, in the heavens above and the earth below, we say it in Aleinu, Ein Oid. There's nothing else. So what do you mean that there's a partition and and He fills all the worlds? So since the Eibishter is everywhere and within everything, so it would seem that it's impossible for anything to be a partition and a barrier and a separation before Him. So then what is it? What can get in the way? Elo, rather, but rather it's like the prophet, the Novi Yeshayahu says, Ki'im, it's only avenei seichem, your avenis, your transgressions, or your mavdilim benechem lebenilekechem. It's your transgressions which separate you from Hashem. That is the only thing that can cause a problem, an obstruction, and a separation in our relationship with the Eibishter. And the reason is, Vatam, because they are neged, they oppose, they're against the will of the Eibishter, Machayas Akel, who is Machaya, who gives life to everything. As it's written, that everything, whatever Hashem wills, He has done in the heavens and the earth. And when I go against the will of the Eibishter, I'm going against His entire Chayas, His entire relationship with the world. And therefore that can serve as a barrier and as a separation. Nothing else can. But other than going against the Eibishter's will. With that, we're going to skip the parentheses here. Once there's this separation, now we can start understanding the damage that starts to be done, and then we can start understanding some of the questions we asked in the beginning of Perek Dalet. So here in Perek Dalet, we just finished, he told us the DNA of the neshama, so we understand now where the neshama comes from. Then he tells us how the neshama comes down into the body. He told us over here through the Eibishter's speech, the pnimius of his speech. So it's wonderful. Life is good. The neshama is very much a part of Hashem. It's down here. The Eibishter instructed it to come down here from the pnimius of his speech. Wonderful. Just one problem, and that is that there can be a separation. There can be a disruption to this relationship. That he starts explaining to us by telling us about this rope. Yes, when things are good, when everything is fine, then you shake one end of the rope, it'll affect the other end of the rope. One end of the rope is connected on top, the bottom part of the rope is connected on bottom. The neshama as well. But sometimes the rope can get severed. There can be a disconnect. And that's what he's going to come and tell us now. That's what's going to come. Middle of the page, 190, right after the parentheses. V'zeu inyan hakores. Remember we spoke about kores, which means to cut off, or the fancy word for it is excision, right? We said it on Yom Kippur many times. Some sins, the punishment is kores. There are different transgressions, different sins. Some of them, the punishment is death by hands of court. 4 types of misas. Then there's kores and misa b'dei shamayim. So now he deals with Koris. This is the meaning of Koris. Shenichras v'nifsak chevel hamshacha. This chevel, this rope of hamshacha mishem Havaya Baruch Hu, which is drawn from Yudke Vavke, is nichras, can become severed. V'nifsak, and cut off. That's what it means. As a result, the neshama that's within the body is no longer able to receive its energy from the Eibishter because the rope has been cut off. So it's not connected anymore to the power source, to the Eibishter. Kushikos of Pashas Emer, as it says in Pashas Emer, that nefesh, it speaks about particular sins, that nefesh will be cut off before me. Ani Hashem. And it says milofonai. Could have said that soul. Ani Hashem. What's milofonai? What's this word from before me or from before my face? So he says milofonai daika. Over here, it's particular to say from before my face. Again, face is not a good translation. Ponai means pnimius, the internal part of Hashem. That a person who has committed such terrible things that they become cut off, they became cut off from the pnimius of the Eibishter. That's what it means, milofona. So that's what we know as Koris. If that lifeline is cut, so then there's no more life. It's a result of it's a result. It's not so much as a punishment. It's just a result. If you cut off the wire, then the light is going to stop shining. You unplug, you unplug your phone or your computer, and there's no battery, then it turns off. That's a natural result. Milofonai daika, because what has been cut off is this chevel hamshacha from the inner parts of the Eibishter. That's regarding those terrible things that they're punished. The result is Koris. What about the Bishar Averis, Shein Behem Koris? Other sins that do not have the punishment of Koris? What harm, what damage is done then? Al kol ponim hein peig minis hanefesh keneda. Al kol ponim, at some point, in some sense, they defect the peigmin, they defect the nefesh. Keneda, as is known. And upagam hu meloshen pgimas hasakin. What do we mean by a defect? A defect, he says, is like the pagam that you have in a sakin is on a knife. To shecht, the chalaf, the knife that's used for shechita has to be a very sharp knife, but it's not allowed to have any pagam. It's not allowed to have any nicks or any defects whatsoever. And when there is even one little nick, it already makes the whole knife invalid. So he says that when one commits a sin whose punishment is not kores, it may not be kores, but it does cause a defect. Like even a little teeny nick causes the whole knife to become invalid. So this causes a defect in a person. What does a defect mean? It gets in the way of the neshama, which is connected to Yudke Vavke, to bring down the energy for the person which is coming through Yudke Vavke. That's what it means, a defect. There's a problem. Sometimes when there's an electrical storm outside and the lights start dimming, sometimes the lights flash on and off, right? Does it happen in Manchester? Yeah. And sometimes they dim. They call it a power surge. I never understood what that means because it's actually an opposite of a power surge. It's actually going down. So these type of things diminish and make less the amount of energy that's coming from the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, which is meant to be coming to our neshama. Our neshama is the one end of it, and the other end is upstairs in the very deepness of the Eibishter. So there are certain things that we do which completely cut off that relationship. That completely cut off that rope. And then there are certain things we do which cause a diminution in the energy. A pgam, as he says, like in a knife. A knife, it completely invalidates the knife. But here it doesn't invalidate, but it does cause a diminution in the energy that's coming from Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. Well, derech mashal, this would be by way of an analogy of michevel av, from a very thick rope. Famous mashal, shazun mitayag chavolim dakim, which is woven of 613 strands, right? If you have any rope, you have a rope, it's always composed of many little strands of rope. The more strands that are wound up in it, the thicker, the stronger the rope will be. So he says the same thing is over here. Our rope, which is connecting us, Yaakov Chevel Nachalosei, connecting us to the Eibishter, is a rope consisting of 613 strands. So to this Chevel, this above mentioned Chevel, through which the Hamshach of the flow of energy comes from, contains 613 mitzvahs. When you transgress one of them, this Chevel Hadak, one specific strand, is broken. Okay, you can still live with 620, you're still good. Another one, you can live with 611. But if all of them are broken, then it's over. He's going to go on to further elaborate. We'll continue Mitzvah Hashem next week. Any questions?
Yes, is that share next week?
Yeah, I'm okay with the share.
It's Cholamoid.
Oh, is that a problem?
No, I enjoyed it.
If I'm hot coffee, I'll have to give
Even
the chair
if
for this
I go, even if I go on an outing, I can still do Zoom on my phone.
Very good. If you go to an outing at 10 o'clock in the morning, yeah.
Remy,